Hey everyone, it's Scott from Heroic Studios Gaming coming at you with another video here from Heroic Studios Gaming. It is Witcher month, so today we're going to be talking about the Witcher TV show. The Witcher TV show. Witcher TV show came out in 2019 on Netflix and has been exclusively on Netflix, so you won't be able to see it anywhere else. But it was originally announced in 2017, and it is actually a pretty good adaptation of the Witcher world. It was written by these people. Who have recently kind of made comments that they weren't necessarily 100% behind the books and or the video games, and so that's been sort of a controversy in the current time frame. But these people here did the writing for the show and did a pretty decent job of adapting it, in my opinion. Though there's a lot of things that are kind of left, that are sort of like left on the table that should have been brought in, and then other things that they brought in way earlier for theoretically continuity purposes, but like not exactly. There's things that play out a lot differently. Like in the Last Wish story that they tell, it's vastly different from that, and it focuses a lot on Yennefer's like desires, which we really didn't know about in the books until much later. And also the way that the scenes play out are much different. Like, for example, Geralt does not walk in on her with like all these runes on her body trying to get the djinn to grant her wish. That's not how it plays out in the book, but that's neither here nor there. And then Ciri's whole business, there's a lot about like Geralt and Ciri and Sintra that wasn't really in the books, and so it plays out differently. But it's clear that they read the people who wrote or adapted the show to the books to the show did actually read the books, so that's at least a plus side. But anyway, getting back to it, the show stars Henry Cavill as the Witcher, and then Anya Chaloorata as Yennefer, Freya Allan as Ciri, Joey Bateman as Jaskier, and then a series of other people that don't matter because those are really the important people, like Adam Levy as Mousak, Jeremy Crawford as Yarpenziger, and things like that. But anyway, so this is a good show. It's really entertaining. The first season is incredibly disjointed, I will say that, which tracks if you've read the books. Like I mentioned in my review of the books, the first two books are just like a series of short stories, and they're not necessarily in chronological order. Well, the way they did this show is that they did the same thing. They didn't do it in chronological order, but it's not that the episodes themselves are out of chronological order. Each of the episodes is broken up. It has various stories happening in each of the episodes, and that is not in chronological order, which is actually kind of hard to track because the show doesn't do any kind of like time stamping to let you know that it's now 100 years before, and now it's modern time or current time, and then it's 50 years ago, and now it's like a week ago, and it doesn't really tell you that. You just have to sort of pay attention and follow along. But there's some little trigger moments where you realize that, for example, Foltest is a kid in one scene, and we saw Foltest 2 episodes ago as an adult, or like an episode ago as an adult. So that kind of stuff. It doesn't really do a very good job of explaining that it's out of chronological order, which is kind of disappointing for people who this is their first approach to The Witcher. My wife, for example, had no real understanding as to what was happening because of the chronology being all messed up, which is why when they did the second season, they actually did everything in chronological order, and it's just a continuous tale from start to finish, like one big long story arc. Like a traditional TV show. And I know that's why they did that, was because the major complaints from the first season was that people were having a hard time following along the chronology of what was happening. So that's the downside. But it was actually very cool for me to see these things happening. And overall, the show itself does a great job, like I've mentioned before. But it does also some cool things. We get to see a lot more action from Geralt that we didn't necessarily get to see in the books. A lot more... Some involvement with monsters that we didn't really get to see, and some monsters that come directly from the video games. Something that like occurred when I was reading the Witcher RPG book was that they kept mentioning Neckers, for example, and I have no idea what the heck a Necker is. They don't appear in the books at all, but they appear in the video games quite a bit because they're like a low-level monster that they just kind of throw at the characters, the players, like constantly. And I didn't know what that was, but there's a scene in the book. Or a scene in the show where a bunch of Neckers attack. But they don't call them Neckers, so we don't really know that. So I didn't even know that, having watched the show, that's what the Neckers were. I had to like base it off of context, and then some of the pictures from the RPG and the comics that made me realize that the particular type of monster they're dealing with is the Neckers from the video game. So that was an interesting, weird thing to happen. So they pull in stuff from the video games as well, which is kind of, I think, why some of the changes that they made to adapt the story are different than they are in the book, is because they're sort of adapting them kind of from how the video game played it out a little bit. So obviously the writers also played the video games, or at least one of them. But I also understand that Henry Cavill himself is quite a large fan of the Witcher universe, and therefore had a lot of input as to how things should play out in the TV show. And so it's distinctly possible that he thought that these things would change. These changes might be better if they used like monsters from the video games rather than from the book. And so the scene is different because there's a different type of monster in them, or it's a scene that doesn't really exist in the book. So overall, it's a pretty good show. The upside to the show is that it doesn't matter if you have any knowledge of the Witcher universe whatsoever. You can dive right in. They do a great job of showing a bunch of the visuals and you get to know some of the stuff earlier on that you have to find out about later. Like Aretusa, for example, is explained a lot more earlier on in the show than in the book, where I think the first time we actually see or know anything about Aretusa is like book 3 or 4, where there's a whole bunch going on in Aretusa, and we get some insight into Aretusa and the Brotherhood of Sorcerers and the Sisterhood of Sorcerers and all that business. But we do have in season 1, it covers basically the first 2 books and then part of the 3rd book, if I remember correctly. And so that's what season 1 is. And season 2 is kind of like the 3rd and 4th books, but also a bunch of stuff that wasn't some original stuff. And then season 3 so far hasn't come out, but season 3 will be Henry Cavill's last season. That's the controversy that's going on in the Witcher universe, is that Henry Cavill is not signed on for the 4th season of the show. And one of the major reasons for that apparently has a lot to do with the fact that the people who write the show are continuing this thing that happened in season 2, where they're kind of doing their own thing, and they're not really pulling from the books or the video games anymore. They're just kind of writing their own stuff. And Henry Cavill apparently wasn't a big fan of that vein of going. So he decided to drop out, and there was some back and forth between him and the writers and the production team, and then he's got his own stuff with Superman going on. So all that's happening. And then Liam Hemsworth is supposed to take over for Geralt in season 4. We'll see how that goes, because season 3 hasn't come out yet, so I don't know what the weird sort of story things that they're going on. I'll probably keep watching just because I like the Witcher stuff, the Witcher world. So I'll probably keep watching anyway. But otherwise, it's a two-thumb show. But I will give you the heads up that watching the first season is disjointed, and so if you haven't watched it yet and you go to watch it now, you're going to be like really confused, because it does bounce around all over the place with any kind of timestamp indicators whatsoever. Like we see Yennefer, like young Yennefer, doing a bunch of things and becoming a mage, which is stuff that is never shown in the books and only brought up because some questions are asked and some dialogue that explains what it was like for Yennefer prior to becoming a mage. And so a lot of that was kind of like written by the show people. That was original creation. And so it was fine to do that, because they at least had a baseline to work with. And then but then there's some things that are just like, don't know where that came from, especially in season 2, where it's like, I have no idea. And I had to like look it up and find out that, oh, this was a thing that they encountered in the video game. And so that's what happened. And I was like, oh, they're pulling from a story from the video game or something, which is weird, but okay. Anyway, so I give it 2 thumbs up. Worth a watch if you have Netflix. It's worth your time to watch this 2 seasons and potentially the 3rd season. And then, I don't know, from there, you can judge it for yourself. At that point, you've watched 2 seasons. You can figure out if you want to keep watching, I guess. That's it. That's all I have to say about the Witcher TV show. I just want to give you a quick review and tell you that it is actually pretty good. From the perspective of somebody who read the books and has read some of the comic books, right? That is actually pretty good. And, it would be really kind of fun to watch if you haven't seen it yet. So that's all. Hope you guys enjoy watching TV shows, and I hope that you get to enjoy The Witcher. But otherwise, I'll see you on the other side. Hopefully you have some good gaming.